Hi friends, I am Uday Kandpal and I welcome you all with yet another lecture on NCERT Class 6 History Chapter 4 with Fact Elaboration by Uday Kandpal. The name of the chapter is What Books and Burials Tell Us. So let's start. The Ancient Books. The Vedas are the ancient knowledge source of the Indian philosophy and literature. The Vedic literature is broadly divided into two categories: Shruti, the one that is heard, and Smriti, the one that is remembered. Shruti describes the sacred text comprising the central canon of Hinduism, which the Vedas, Brahmanas, Aryankas, and Upanishads. The basic material or mantra text of each of the Vedas is called Samhita. Some post-Vedic texts are also known as Samhitas, such as Ashtavakra Gita, Bhrigu Samhita, Brahma Samhita, Dev Samhita, Garg Samhita, Kashyap Samhita, Shiv Samhita, and Yoga Yajnavalkya Samhita. Smriti literally means that which is remembered, and it is entire body of the post-Vedic classical Sanskrit literature. It comprises Vedang, Shad Puranas, Itihas, Upved, Tantra, Agam, Upang. There is another Vedic, post-Vedic class of Sanskrit literature called epics, which includes Ramayana and Mahabharata. So these are all important books, ancient books. Now let's come to the Vedas. The Vedas are a large body of Sanskrit religious texts originating in ancient India, composed in Vedic Sanskrit. The texts constitute the oldest layer of Sanskrit literature and the old scriptures of Hinduism. There are four Vedas: the Rig Veda, the Yajur Veda, the Sam Veda, and the Athar Veda. Rig Veda is the oldest of the Vedas. Each Vedas have four subdivisions: the Samhitas, which are the mantras and the benedictions; the Aranyakas, texts on the ritual ceremonies, sacrifices, and symbolic sacrifices; the Brahmanas, commentary on rituals, ceremonies, and sacrifices; and the Upanishads, the text discussing meditation, philosophy, and spiritual knowledge. Some scholars add a fifth category called the Upasanas, or the worship. Vedas are Shruti, what is heard, distinguishing them from other religious texts, which are called Smriti, what is remembered. Hindus consider the Vedas as Apaurusheya, that means not of a man or a superhuman, and impersonal, authorless. So a Veda cannot be created by a person, a Purush, or a person or a man. So that is why it is called Apaurusheya. Rig Veda consists of more than 1,000 hymns called Sukta, or which means well said. The hymns are in praise of gods and goddesses. Three gods are especially important: Agni, the god of fire; Indra, the warrior god; Som, the plant from which the special drink was prepared. So three devas are there. Most of the hymns of the Rig Veda were composed and taught by men. Some of them were composed by women. Rig Veda is an old form of Vedic Sanskrit, different from current version of Sanskrit. There are many prayers in Rig Veda for cattle, children, especially sons and horses. So we are now talking about the Rigvedic society. So there are many prayers in the Rigveda for cattle, children, especially sons and horses. The Vedic period saw the emergence of a hierarchy of social classes that would remain influential. Vedic religion developed into Brahmanical orthodoxy, and around the beginning of the Common Era, the Vedic tradition formed one of the main constituents of the Hindu synthesis. So today we depend on the Vedas for Hindu intelligentsia. Horses were yoked to chariots that were used in battles which were fought to capture cattle. Battles were also fought to capture land, which was important for pasture and for growing that ripened quickly, such as barley. Some battles were fought for water and to capture people. Some of the wealth obtained were kept by leaders, some was given to the priest, and the rest was distributed among the people. Some wealth was used for the performance of yajnas, or sacrifices, in which the offerings were made into the fire. Offering could include ghee, grains, and in some cases animals. There were several ways to describe people in terms of work they do, the language they speak, the place where they belong to, their family, their communities, and cultural practices. There are two groups who are described in terms of their works. Priests sometimes are called as Brahmins, who perform rituals, and the Rajas, who are the rulers or the kings. The Rajas are not like the Rajas we know. They did not collect taxes, did not have capital palaces, armies, neither the son succeeded the father as Rajas. Two words were used to describe people as a whole: Jana and the Vish. Vaishya word comes from the word Vish. The Vash is a Varn. Sometimes people were referred to as Aryas and their opponents were Das or Dasyus. Later the term Dasa were used for slaves. The stone boulders, also called the megaliths, were carefully arranged and used by the people as burial sites. This practice of erecting megalith began throughout 3000 years ago and was prevalent throughout the Deccan, South India, and in the northeast and Kashmir. Inamgaon burial, it is the site on the river Ghod, a tributary of Bhim. It was occupied between 3600 and 2700 years ago. Crops and food during the Rigvedic society. Wheat, rice, and barley were known at the time of Vedic period. These were important grains grown in this time period. Archaeologists have found seeds of wheat, barley, rice, pulses, millets, peas, and sesame. Fruits such as ber, amla, jamun, dates, and a variety of berries were collected. Tobacco was not known to the Rigvedic people. Animals during the Rigvedic society: cattle, buffalo, goat, sheep, dog, horse, ass, pig, sambar, spotted deer, black buck, antelope, hare, mongoose, birds, crocodile, turtle, crab, and fish. These were the animals during the Rigvedic society. Then metals during the Rigvedic society. During the Rigvedic period, only copper was used, for which the general term ayas has been used. In a later period, when iron came to use, copper and iron became to be known as Lohit ayas and Shyam ayas respectively. The trade and the traders Vanik were known in the Rigvedic era as Vanik in the Rigvedic era. From the evidence of Vedic literature, we know that the Vedic Aryans were acquainted with the use of the following metals: gold, called as Hiranya, Harit, Suvarn, Jatrup, Chand, silver, Rajat Hiranya or Rajat; a third metal, iron, copper or bronze, as Ayas or Loha Ayas; copper as Ayas, probably Syam Ayas; iron or Loha Ayas; iron or steel as Ayas like Syam Ayas or Krishna Ayas; lead, Sisa; tin, Trapu. Rigvedic life. Usually, the father was the head of the family. As the head, he controlled other members. The younger members obeyed the senior members. The relation between the father, mother, brothers, and sisters rested on the sense of duty, devotion, affection, and cordiality. The size of the family could be big enough to contain many members, from grandparents to the grandchildren, but they all lived in peace. In the daily life, the Aryan householders believed in plain living and high thinking. Truth, mercy, kindness, goodness, mutual help, and understanding were the ideals of family life. The Chatur Ashrama. The Aryans believed in the system of Chatur Ashramas, or the fourfold division of one's life. At the young age, when man received education and training, he practiced brahmacharya. Thereafter, he married and led the grahastha life, or the life of a householder. When man reached the third stage of his life, he adopted vanprastha. During that period, he lived in a cottage away in forest to perform religious duties. In the final phase of life, in the old age, he practiced the sannyas vrat by renouncing everything. These practices showed the discipline of the Aryan life. Position of women. The women held a high position of the Aryan society. Inside family, they played a prominent role. They exercised much influence in domestic affairs. In religious ceremonies and festivals, women enjoyed equal place with men. Before their marriages, the Aryan daughters received education in the house of their parents. The word Dhuhitri in Sanskrit and the daughter in English came from the root Aryan word Dugh, which means milking the cow. Perhaps the Aryan girls were fond of looking after the cows as their domestic duty. There was no child marriage in Rigvedic society. Girls lived in the house of their parents till they attained marriageable age. They had freedom to select their husbands. Of course, arranged marriages were more usual custom. Marriage were considered a sacred obligation in the Vedic culture. It was indissoluble. There were no seclusion of women in Vedic society. The Vedic women took part in the highest socio-religious duties. They studied the Vedas. Some of them, like Lokmutra, Ghosha, Vishwavara, and Apala, became immortal as the authors of Vedic hymns. Rigvedic life, the social equality. The most praiseworthy feature of the early Vedic society was the social equality of men. All Aryans were equal among themselves. There were no caste system to separate man from man. Even Aryans Every Aryan could learn the Vedas, could fight battles as a soldier, and work as a cultivator. It is only the conquered people who were given a lower rank in the society as dasas. In brief, the Rig Veda Aryans lived in an ideal society which was unique in the ancient world. Economic life. The economic condition of the people in the early Vedic society was prosperous. The Aryans were a hard-working race. They were also the believers of simple life. They loved to live in villages. Their economic activity mostly centered in and around the villages. Agriculture. Agriculture was the chief occupation of Vedic Aryans. They regarded cultivation as the main source of their livelihood. Around every village there was a plenty of cultivable lands and wild pastoral fields for the cattle. Each family had its own land to grow crop. Grasslands for the animals were held in common by all the villagers. The lands under cultivation were called kshetra. The Aryans depended much on the rains and rivers for agriculture. They also took water from the canals to their field to make their land fertile. They used manure. Than and Java were the two chief products of agriculture. Since the land were fertile in those days and the population was small, there was enough food in Vedic India to keep the people happy and self-sufficient. Rearing of animals. Next to agriculture, the Vedic Aryans paid great attention to rearing of cattle and various other domestic animals. Milk was regarded more useful and cows were paid the maximum care. In every village, there were herd boys to drive the cattle to green pasture lands. Sheep, goats and horses were the other useful animals in the Vedic society. Trade and commerce. The early Aryans also developed trade, commerce, and industry. Merchants were there to carry various useful goods from place to place. Varieties of cloth, metal goods, and skin products were sold by traders in different markets. Carts drawn by horses and oxen usually carried the articles of trade. Boats were used in rivers for internal movement of goods. Rare evidences are also there to prove that Vedic Aryans had maritime activities across the sea. Cottage industry. The cottage industry flourished in the Vedic society. In most villages, there were weavers, smiths or metal workers, carpenters, and also tanners. Artistic goods were made at select centers. Ornaments, weapons, chariots, implementation for cultivation, utensils, and many other useful things were made by the people for regular use. The Aryans loved to eat rice, barley, milk, meat, and fish and fruits. In festival and religious occasions, they used to drink somras. On the whole, economic life of Vedic period was a life of plenty and prosperity. It is said that the early Aryans did not build big cities or nagar, but they built strongholds and fort known as pur with the walls around the strong houses inside. So there are many cities in India which are named as pur, like Nagpur, Udaipur, Jodhpur. So purs are named according to that tradition. Political organization. The Aryans were powerful people. They came to India in an organized way. As they spread themselves in India and settled permanently, they developed political organizations in the society for a better life. The nature of the Vedic political organizations are as follows. Administrative divisions. Several families formed a village called or the gram. The head of the gram was called Gramani. He regulated the affairs of the village and maintained peace in this area. Several villages formed a district or a canton which was called as the Vis. The head of the Vis was called as Vispati. If the Vis was very big in size, the Vispati ruled more or less like a king. Several districts formed a Jana or people, which was like a big political unit, or the Rashtra. The Rashtra or the state or the Jana was ruled by the head named as Rajan or the king. He was also said to be without a rival and a destroyer of rivals. In later times, when the territory became big in the size, the Rajan became a Samrat. The king and kingship. In Vedic India, the kingship was generally a hereditary institution. The king occupied a position of honor. He was anointed by the chief priest. He usually enjoyed the confidence and loyalty of the people. He lived in the palace. In dress, manners, and style, he maintained the dignity of royalty. The son of the king had his rights to father's kingdom. Because of such continuity, it was duty of the ruling king to train his successor in the art of good government as well as in the various virtues required of a monarch. At places, the subject also should elect or select a king for their land. The king appointed several officers. Among such officers, the Purohit or the chaplain, the Senani is the commander of the army, the Dutt or the messenger, the Doot or the messenger, not Dutt. The Gramani or the village headman played a prominent role. The king also had his advisors or ministries. He appointed spies to collect information about the people. The king was required to perform two main duties. One was the protection of his land and the people from outside enemies. For this he maintained his army. The other was to serve and please the people. The king or the Rajan of the Vedic age was not an autocrat. He governed according to the laws and the customs of the land, according to the religious beliefs and with the advice of the seers, sages and elders. There were also some kind of popular assemblies in those days called Samiti to give an opinion on the affairs of the state. There were also Sabha or the Council of Elders containing wise men to advise the government. The monarchy was thus limited. It is also understood that the places there were some kind of republican governments among some of the Aryan tribes. The term Gana or the people was perhaps used for such a state. Its head was called as Ganpati or Jesht. So Ganpati was head of the Gana or the republican government. On the whole, the Vedic political organizations were sound and stable. The state rested on the foundations of ethics, morality, virtue, and popular will. In course of time, smaller kingdoms yielded place to bigger kingdoms. Powerful monarch wanted to rule over large territories. Stronger political units or organization thus became the need of the time. Religious life. The Aryans were deeply religious. Their spiritual thoughts were of highest order. Among the ancient races of the earth, no race was equal to the Indian Aryans of the early Vedic age in the spiritual and the religious thoughts. While the whole world was in the darkness of ignorance and blind beliefs, the Rig Veda India held the lamps of wisdom. Among the ancient, most religious of the mankind, the Vedic religion is considered the best. The Rig Veda Aryans thought of the supreme creator through the creation. Nature presented the different manifestation of that creation. They therefore became the worshippers of nature. The mighty elements of nature were regarded by the Aryans as their gods. All the useful elements of the nature appeared in divine form in the Aryan religion thought. Zeus or the shining sky, Prithvi or the mother earth, Indra or the god of rain and thunder, Varuna or the lord of waters, Surya or the illuminator, Marut or the lord of storms, Vayu or the god of wind, Agni or the god of fire, and the Usha or the goddess of dawn were the famous divinities of the Aryan worship. Every one of them was a part of nature. While believing in the several gods and goddesses, the early Aryans developed the faith in supreme being who was the creator of all. Every other god was his representation. While the religious faith of the Vedic Aryans was deeply spiritual, their religious practices were most simple. They performed yajnas in which they made the offerings of ghee, milk, grain, and other things while singing hymns in the honor of the gods and goddesses. In the religious conduct, they became virtuous, kind, charitable, and truthful. Thus, was the early Vedic civilization glorified. The social, political, and the religious conditions of the time were brightest proofs of the great civilization. Archaeology in the Vedic period. Archaeological cultures identified with the phase of the Vedic material culture include the ochre colored pottery culture, the Gandhar cave culture, the black and the red ware culture, and the painted grey ware culture. Ochre colored pottery culture was the first found approximately between 1950 to 51 in the western Uttar Pradesh in the Badaun and the Bijnor district. It is thought that this culture was prominent during the latter half of the second millennium within the transition between the Indus Valley civilization and the end of the Harappan culture. This pottery is typically created with a wheel ware and is ill-fired to a fine medium fabric decorated with a red slip and occasional black band. When this pottery was worked with, it often left an ochre color on the land, most likely because of the waterlogging, bad firing wind condition, or a mixture of these factors. This pottery was found all throughout the Doab, most of it found in the Muzaffarnagar, Meerut, Bulandshahr district, but also existing outside these districts, extending north and south of Bhadrabad. The pottery dust, however, seems to exist within different time frames of popularity. Ochre colored pottery seeming to occur in the areas such as Rajasthan earlier than we see it in the Doab, despite the Doab being heavily associated with this culture. Second, the Gandhar grave culture refers to the proto-historic cemeteries found in the Gandhar region stretching all the way into the Bajwar to the Indus. These cemeteries seem to follow a set of grave structure and mortuary practice such as the influx, inhumation and cremation. This culture is thought to be in three stages: the lower, in which the burials take place in the masonry lined pits, the upper, in which the urn, burials and the cremations are added, and the surface level, in which the graves are considered with huge stone slabs. In the lower stage, the excavators found that these graves are typically 2 to 3 feet deep and covered with the stones on top. After digging out the stones, the skeletons were found facing southwest to the northeast, with the head facing one direction and the hands laying on the top of another. Female skeletons were often found wearing hairpins and jewelry. Pottery is greatly important to this culture, as pottery was often used to a grave good, being buried with the bodies of the dead. Buried alongside the skeletons, we typically see the various pots on the top of the body, averaging at about 5 or less pieces of pottery per grave. Within this culture, we typically see two kinds of pottery, the grey ware or the red ware. So the Gandhar grave culture is about the grey ware or the red ware. Then there was black and red ware culture, was coined as a term in 1946 by Sir Mortimer Wheeler. So Mortimer Wheeler, this is important. The pottery, as the name suggests, typically has a black rim inside surface and a red lower half of the outside of the piece. Redware pottery tends to fall in two categories: offering stands and cooking vessels. Most of those pieces of pottery were open-mouthed bowls and were burnished, painted and slipped on one side. However, jars, pots and dishes on the stands have also been found in the small quantities. Black and redware and the surrounding culture began its spreading during the Neolithic period and continues until the early medieval period in India, as well as being found in the parts of West Asia and Egypt. There are many theories about the process of its creation, the most popular being the use of the inverted firing technique or the simultaneous oxidation and reduction firing. One researchers, however, learned that these two theories are quite possibly misguided, as they were able to recreate the black and the red ware pottery through the double firing, one stating the characteristic coloration of the pottery cannot merely be achieved by inverted firing. Then comes the painted graveyard culture. Is a significant pottery style that has been linked to the group of people who settled in Satluj, Ghaggar and the upper Ganga Yamuna valleys. is loosely classified with the early Aryans who migrated to India in the beginning of the Vedic period. It is also thought that these groups that introduced the painted grey ware culture also brought iron technology to the Indo-Gangetic plains, making the pottery a momentous mark of northern Indian Iron Age. The styles of grey ware often includes clay wheel thrown to the smooth texture, ash grey in color, and often decorated with black ink, creating a small circular pattern, sometimes spiral swastikas or sigmas. Grey ware pottery is almost exclusively drinking ware and tends to have three different forms: narrow waisted, tall drinking glasses, mid sized drinking goblets, and drinking vases without an outturned lips. They were a distinct grey ware culture surrounding the establishment of the pottery, but while the culture is significant, grey ware has only made up 10 to 15% of the Vedic pottery, a measure of the pottery ware, red ware, as grey ware pottery was seen as highly valued luxury. So the painted grey ware pottery was highly valued luxury. So there are four things: austere colored pottery cultures, then the grey ware or the red ware or the Gandhar grave culture, then the black ware and the red ware, and then the painted grey ware culture. Now the Rigvedic period versus the later Rigvedic period. The characteristics is source. So the source of Vedic period from 1500 BC to 1000 BC. Rig Veda, later Vedic 1000 BC to 600 BC, all the other Vedas, the Yajurved, the Atharved, and the Samved. Towards the end, Upanishads were compiled, they criticized rituals and emphasized on philosophy. Location: Vedic, northern and western part of the subcontinent, sub-Sindhu religion. They did not know land beyond Yamuna. Later Vedic extended to the whole of western UP, Ganga, Yamuna, Doab, and penetrated Deccan and Vindhyas and South Indias. The early Vedic polity, no concept of territory, only tribe, jana, total members not larger than 100. Kings, Rajan were advised by the assemblies like Sabha and Samiti, had no strong armies. Wars known as Kavati are fought for the cattle and not for the territory. Chiefs received the voluntary offerings called Bali. Remember it's not sacrifice. Bali is something given. Concept, the later Vedic polity, concept of territory and territorial administration appear. Janpada, state; Rashtra, territory. Royal prowess increased many folds. Rituals and sacrifices were performed to strengthen the king's position. Rajsuya, consecration ceremony. Vajpayee, chariot race, and Ashwamedh, horse sacrifice were done. Character of Sabha and Samiti changed. They were dominated by chief and rich nobles. Women were no longer permitted. Even in the later Vedic times, king did not possess a standing army as per NCERT. Wars were fought not only for cattle but territory. Bali was voluntary gift, became mandatory tax. Economy, predominantly pastoral, cattle-based herding economy. Men's wealth was measured in the number of cows he owned. Private land ownership was not yet established. Agriculture was known. Economy of later Vedic was a settled life, agriculture and crafts. Then agriculture, Vedic period was mostly barley. Later Vedic barley continued, but rice and wheat became the chief crops. Family and women, Vedic period, the family kula, household griha, family was joint patriarchal society with indications of polyandry. Women would attend assemblies, they could offer sacrifices along with their husband. Widow remarriage was allowed, no instances of child marriage, and marriageable age in the Rig Veda seems to be 16-17. Later Vedic position of father increased and women were given lower position. Position of women became deplorable. They couldn't attend assembly. Child marriage also into vogue. Institution of Gotra appears, and later Vedic period, marriage within the Gotra was not permitted. Same Gotra was not permitted. Social division, society in the Vedic period was largely egalitarian or equal. Varna was a term of the color. The indigenous people conquered by Aryans were called the Das or the Dasyus. Differentiation was based on the occupation existed. In the later Vedic period, the social divisions were divided into four Varnas. The growing cult of sacrifices add to the power of Brahmanas. The four Ashramas, the Brahmachar, Grihastha, Vanpras, and the Sannyasi. Religion in the early Vedic period was the nature god Indra, mentioned in the most number of passages. Agni, the second highest mentioned. Soma, the sacred drink. Sacrifice less important, but mostly prayers were important. In later Vedic period, natural gods are replaced by Prajapati, Rudra, and Vishnu. Idolatry appears. Pushan was regarded as the god of Shudras. Sacrifice became more important than prayers. So the important features in this chapter are: match the following. Sukta is means well said. Chariots is used in battles. Yajna is sacrifice. Das means slave. Megalith is a strong boulder. Fill in the blanks. Slave were used for work. Megaliths were found in South India, Kashmir, and Northeast. Stone circles or boulders on the surface were used to point out the exact place of burial. Portholes were used for burying the other members of the same family at the same place. People at Inamgaon ate peas, pulses, rice, barley, and sesame. So thank you for watching my lecture. Hope you liked it and learnt a lot for the competitive exams. Have a nice day. Bye.